Hello, I'm Rick Bine, a former Peace Corps volunteer. I'm holding in my hands a cup of coffee. You probably know who the major producer of coffee is in the world as an agricultural product. And you're right, it's Brazil. And this is why I worked in the Peace Corps. This was in the 1960s. And I had a lot of, I spent those 2 years there, a lot of adventures, and I learned to enjoy coffee. Their coffee is much stronger than ours is. When I was there, out in this country here, up on the plateau, you can sort of see there's the different geography here. There's a plateau here, it's a little higher, and then there's a lowland over here. I was working up on the plateau, just a few miles from this lowland area. We call that lowland a Pantanal, and in Portuguese meaning swamp. And it's a huge swamp. It doesn't drain to the Amazon. It drains all the way down to Argentina here, and it's only 300 feet above sea level, so it takes forever. They're very heavy rains, and the swamp stays there much of the year. My Peace Corps colleague and I had the opportunity to go down there with a family. They were going to move the family down there, and they wanted to get him in there before the rain started. So they would be sequestered there for several months before, or maybe 9 months before they could get out of there unless they swam. Anyways, we got on this truck. We had it loaded down with furniture and whatever, and Richard and I sat in the back, and we bounced along, and somebody in the back, there were several Brazilians back there as well, somebody found a bottle of cachaça. Cachaça is an alcohol that was discovered or developed in Brazil, made out of sugarcane. It's pretty strong, and you might be able to get it in the States here. But anyway, the bottle was opened and passed around, and eventually got in the hands of the driver. And it wasn't long before he was pretty polluted, and he kept running off the road. Well, we had to get out of the truck and help push it back onto the road again. And it happened again. By that time, we were pretty muddy and filthy. And when we arrived down on the Pantanal, and we went over to this farmstead, and at being very filthy, the Brazilians also were pretty dirty, and so we saw this little meander that came off of the main river there. The river's called the Taquari River, and this little meander was there and looked pretty attractive. So we stripped off and jumped into the water and started soaping up. And we didn't notice that the Brazilians would jump in and get wet and get out of the water and soap up, and then quickly get back in and wash the soap off and get out of the water. Richard and I were there just enjoying ourselves and just having a good old time in the water without any thought to what was going on there. And eventually we walked out of the water, and just as we did, this little old man came by in front of us, and he said, "You were lucky this time. Men do not swim with piranhas without a swimming suit on." And that was a rather sobering moment, and had all kinds of strange thoughts. But anyway, we went over to the house afterwards, and we sat there and had dinner, and we started around the campfire, and they told piranha stories for an hour or so, and it was kind of frightening to hear about them. And one of them I remember was talking about how they would drive the cattle. The cattle would graze down in the Pantanal in the dry season, and then in the rainy season they'd move them out. There'd be thousands of these cattle, and they would herd them up onto the plateau. But anyway, when they had to cross these rivers, the piranhas would take little bites out of them, and an hour later they'd start getting sores, and some of them would die and whatever. So in order to avoid this problem, they would find their sickest cow, shove it into the water, and the piranhas would feast on it, and the water would run down. They wait till the carcass had moved down what was left of it about 100 yards, and then they'd cross their cattle across peacefully. None of the cattle were molested or anything, and they went on their way. And so it's kind of told you something about the nature of these fish, the piranhas that were there. And so anyway, at night I had a hard time sleeping. I had nightmares and curled up in my bed, my knees together, and just imagining all kinds of terrible things, and got up in the morning and we went down there. They said, let's go fishing, and we went up to that same place we'd been taking the bath, and we put the lines in, and we used fresh calf liver, kind of bloody, and that's what the piranhas like. And apparently they didn't bother us when we were in the water because we weren't bleeding. But they do say that there's the soft, tender spots are sometimes what they go after, and that was a little scary thought as well. But anyway, we throw the hook out there with the calf's liver on it, and it would immediately, the piranhas would attack it, and then we'd pull it in, there was nothing there, so we put another piece of liver on there, and we threw it out, and this time you count 1, 2, and you jerk, and there's a piranha on there, he starts fighting. So you reel it in and reel it in, and when you get there, there's nothing but the head of the piranha there. It's not there. Here's an example of one of these piranhas, one of them that we were catching, and so what would happen is that the head would show up, and so what happened to the rest of the body? Well, his buddies just decided that he looked pretty good too, so they consumed him, and the head's really tough. It's got all scaly, so they couldn't eat that. It's bony, and so anyway, how do you avoid that one? So when we caught it, we hooked it, and you have to wait 1, 2, hook, and then immediately you swing the line all the way back to the land, and then you got a whole piranha. And when you did that, you have to take the piranha off the hook, and that was a challenge because as I was holding this thing on a string, I couldn't believe it, but this thing would jump toward my fingers, and I wasn't about to take the hook out of the mouth, but so we just we stacked up our piranha. We got maybe a dozen of them there in a half an hour, and went back to the camp, and they cooked up the piranha for lunch. And it was interesting. They just cooked them whole. They cooked them they were bony. And so there's just hundreds of bones in these things. So they cooked them really hard till they were crunchy, sort of like eating pretzels. And when you eat them, the hooks were still in the mouth of the piranhas. And so as you eat them, you took the hook out, and there was a bowl right in the middle of the table where everybody put their hooks. And so this is the way how we had to process those piranhas. But anyway, it was quite a little scary opportunity there to see what was going on there. And so the next day, that afternoon we left, went back up onto the plateau again. But I always have that memory of that time. Several years later, my son heard this story, and he said to me, he says, "Dad, you were really lucky when you were swimming in that water." And I said, "Alex, you were the lucky one."